For instance, 7th of October, was that resistance?
What we see now in Gaza and in the West Bank are symptoms of a much deeper and much more important problem.
We're asking an ethnic group of 15 million to allow a terrorist attack to happen and them just to lie down.
I have not seen any reliable proof that the Palestinians are lying about the numbers, because it's not in their interest. It took only a few weeks until that unity was smashed by US and Israel, because the most dangerous thing to Israel is Palestinian unity. So they do everything they can to split and split and split. But to understand the brutality of colonialism, we need to go back to how we colonized North America, how we killed the native Indians. This has nothing to do with the defense of Israel. This is an attack, this is an expansional attack from a colonial power who has stated that their goal in Zionism is from the river to the sea. The mother of all conflicts today, in a way, is the occupation of Palestine. And that has nothing to do with the question of the Jews.
If the Israelis would put down their arms, would there be peace in this region? I'm here with Mads Gilbert. Mads, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tóti, for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So, Iceland, how do you like it?
I love it.
Yeah?
I love Iceland for many reasons. I feel very home here. I think the Nordic countries like Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Faroe Islands should stick more together and be more independent of the big powers, because we have qualities and we have cultures that really needs to be preserved. Like you are very clever in preserving your language. And the environment will need the small nations, and you even have an Institute of Small State Studies in your university. I love that.
Yeah, one of the presidential candidates is like the most prominent figure of the small states studies.
Yeah, and you were among the first ones to recognize Palestine.
Yeah, that's true.
And you have a very, very strong solidarity movement, which I admire. I support it, and I'm invited back. I was here on the speaking tour in 2014, which was a great success. So Iceland to me is it's home.
Mm-hmm. You've been a very eager proponent of the Palestinian cause. What brought you to the Palestinian cause? Where did it start?
How much time do we have?
An hour and a half, approximately.
Well, I was a young medical student, activist. I've always been politically active. I come from a very active family. Brought up by a mother who was a nurse and father who was a big reader. He was an amnesty activist, very anti-totalitarian. I didn't like it that I became a Marxist-Leninist. My mother said, whatever you do, you have to make a stance. You have to have an opinion. And she also said, choose the side of the oppressed, then you will never be wrong. And that sort of was grained into the blood of my childhood and youth. And then as a medical student, I was the editor of the student newspaper at the Faculty of Medicine in Oslo, University of Oslo. And I was extremely engaged in the Vietnam solidarity movement. And the Vietnam solidarity movement taught me things that I was never taught in school about imperialism, colonialism, and how the big powers tried to conquer the world to get raw material. I mean, even the chapters on European colonialism, like the Dutch, the Belgian, the Norwegian, for that sake, the French colonialism in Africa and South America, very insufficient to understand the brutality of colonialism. So the Vietnam War became a big eye-opener for me, and also an eye-opener into the value of solidarity. The two most beautiful words in my language, it's love and it's solidarity. So I was active in the street battles with the police, and we were throwing stones at the U.S. Embassy, and it was really a political school. And then actually, the funny thing is that in '67, the '67 war, when Israel had the war against the surrounding Arab states, the Israeli embassy in Oslo called for support from young Norwegians to go to Israel to work in the kibbutzes, so that the kibbutz Israelis could go to war and to be to be soldiers in the army. And I volunteered. I thought, international solidarity. Went down to the embassy. I registered. They checked me, counted the eyes and ears, and said, "You're good to go." And I called my mother, and my mother called my sister, who was a dedicated also solidarity activist in medical school, she too. And she called me and she said, "What are you doing? What's wrong with you?" I said, "I'm going to Israel." "Why?" "International solidarity." And she said, "You got it all wrong. Come to my place now." And I was really dressed down by her and her good friend Ebba Vargland, who is sort of the queen of the Norwegian Palestine Committee. And that was the first time I heard about the Palestinian people. I was a medical student. Come on. I mean, it was such a shock. So the day after I went down to the Israeli embassy and I said, I'm not going. "Why?" They said, "Because you lied to me." "We didn't lie to you." "Yes, you did. You didn't tell me about the Palestinian people and your occupation of Palestine." So I withdrew my volunteering and became a member of the Norwegian Palestine Committee and started to read up on Palestine. And that was quite a shocking travel into the whole horror of the occupation, the colonization of Palestine and the diaspora, all the Palestinians living as refugees. And funny thing is that a year later I got a letter from the Israeli government thanking me for my brave volunteering. Their intelligence is good, but not that good. And it said in the letter, "In commemoration of your brave and unselfish volunteering, we have planted a tree in our memorial garden park with your name on a brass placket."
Have you visited that tree?
I have not, and I think they have cut it down a long time ago.
All right.
So that was the start. And then the next, spooling forward, the next important point in my history with regards to Palestine was 1981 and 1982, when I went to Beirut as a young doctor of anesthesiology. And I was a member of the first Norwegian emergency surgical team to Beirut. And we did war surgery in the basement of a school in 82 during the invasion and the siege. And that was my first encounter with the Israeli war machine. And the technique of siege, I have to say that, because they did the same to Beirut in 1982 as they've been doing to Gaza for the last 16, 17 years. They cut the power supply, the fuel supply, the water supply, the food supply, the medical supply, and they bombed West Beirut relentlessly through the summer of 82. That changed my life.
Mm-hmm. You've been working at the Al-Shifa hospital, which has been a lot on the news. Let's just fast forward to today. How do you perceive the situation and the current situation?
I'm at loss of words. It's so very dramatic now. If you allow me, I'll read the message I got from my colleague, Dr. Youssef Aborish, who is the Minister of Health in Gaza. He is, in fact, the Deputy Minister of Health in the state of Palestine now. But he is the functional Minister of Health in Gaza. And this one I got at 9 o'clock this morning. He says, during the past 24 hours, 190 Palestinians were martyred, killed in new massacres, including a massacre in the safe zone in the camps west of Rafah, which brings back memories of the massacre at the Baptist Hospital in Gaza City, in which nearly 500 martyrs were killed in defiance of the decision of the International Court of Justice, and a continuing blatant violation and slaughter of children, women and civilians on a daily basis. End of quote. So the last 24 hours, the Israeli army actually rocketed and bombed the tent camps with civilians and killed 190 more in 24 hours. And then you can multiply that by 4 and you have the number of wounded, and a large number of these wounded are burns. And burns are extremely demanding to treat. And there is virtually no hospital capacity left in Gaza, because the Israeli army has not only attacked Shifa with the argument that it's a military base, which has never been proven, they have attacked all the hospitals in Gaza. They have diminished, they have eradicated Palestinian healthcare. And then when they keep bombing, of course, as a medical doctor, I can hardly believe what I see. And this last campaign against Rafah comes in the same 24 hours as the ICJ again has ruled and ordered them to stop the attacks on the civilians. So what world are we living in? No rules anymore.
Yeah, well, like Albert Jonsson, he came on the Channel 2 News the other day, and he said, well, the ICJ and ICC can say all they want, but with regards to big power politics, there's no jurisdiction that can be enforced.
Sure, but do we want that world?
No, we don't want that world. But I want to get a little bit more practical here. What do you see as the main source of ills with regards to the current situation? Do you see any kind of solution that could be realistically put forth?
I'm a medical doctor. I'm not a politician. I'm also a politician, but I'm not. My field of academia is not, state politics, international politics. But I think, as a doctor, I'm trained to try to find the root cause. If you come to me with pain in the chest, I don't give you pain relief. I examine you. I try to find out, could there be a tumor? Could there be cancer? Or do you have been smoking too much? Or have you cracked a rib when you were boxing? So I need to find the root cause and understand the root cause and treat the root cause and not the symptom. What we see now in Gaza and in the West Bank are symptoms of a much deeper and much more important problem, which is not a war between Hamas and Israel. This is an occupied people exercising their right to resist occupation, just as we, by the way, support the Ukrainian people in their just struggle against the Russian occupation, not only with words, but with weapons, with embargo, with lots of political sanctions, and with evacuating wounded, all of that, all of these tools in the toolbox of non-violent support for people fighting against occupation. So for me, the root cause, as you ask me, is the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And that started not on the 7th of October. That started in 1948, when the world said, okay, we'll cut your country in two and we'll give half of it away to the new Jewish state. Fine for Europe, who had a lot of guilt from Holocaust. And of course, they should have a lot of guilt. I grew up in the shadow of the Second World War and Holocaust. I hate the Holocaust. I think it was a massive injustice to the Jewish people. It should never happen again. What was the slogan? Never again. And here you see in front of our eyes a new Holocaust being now
perpetrated.
I'm not saying genocide because I will await the ICJ decision, because the legal aspects of a Holocaust is more than just throwing out a political slogan. But in front of our eyes and our social media, we see now the last 24 hours, 190 killed. We have seen, what is the last number from the UN? This is the last report from UN OCHA. 35,709 killed. And the number of injured has passed 75,000. And these numbers are with graphics, 79,000, actually 80,000 wounded day by day. Every politician of power in the West have these numbers.
Yes, but the source of this is the Ministry of Health.
Not only, that's wrong.
I know. I was reading Orwell the other day, and it says source is...
But can I just finish my line of reasoning? So, if you ask me for a solution, the solution has to solve the root cause of this misery, and that is the Israeli settler colonial project, which is to grab land and to eliminate the indigenous people. Mm. That's the old colonial style. And when you eliminate the indigenous people, you also eliminate all their institutions, because there's going to be no track of that people. That's why they bomb universities, archaeological sites, museums, archives, schools, all the institutional proofs that there is a people living here. So we need to not be superficial and not be distracted by all the struggle of the narrative, because the narrative is now at the centerpiece of the media's attention.
Of course, and it underlies the foreign aid and foreign decisions that underlie everything that happens within that region. But Ministry of Health in Gaza is, of course, as many would put forth, is Hamas, and they would say, well, I don't trust the source of a terrorist organization. The other day, UN had to halve the amount of children and women killed in the region, and I was looking at data from different genocides, and I'm happy that you say that this is not a genocide. Although my opinion has changed a little bit on that after I listened to John Mearsheimer talk about that. Genocide might become an attractive option for Netanyahu if this is prolonged for too long, which is a very worrying development. However, today I would not say that if a region is being bombed that is left with pamphlets saying that the region will be bombed, I would not say that shows genocidal intent. And the Ministry of Health of Gaza of course, has an incentive to say that there are more people that have been killed. In Srebrenica, it took 4 years to gather the information of how many people had been killed. In the Armenian genocide, it took 30 years to gather information. Rwandan genocide, something along those lines. I think it was 8 years or something. So what is interesting about this war is that it seems like the Ministry of Health in Gaza, or as some would say, Hamas, the information about the death toll is remarkable, which means that it is also probably false, since they have an incentive that they should put forth a number that is higher than is truthful. How would you respond to this kind of, I'm not going to say accusation, but
it's a blatant accusation.
Okay.
Because you join in now in the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and actually your accusation is that the Palestinian people is the only people that have to prove their own death. Let me elaborate on that, because I've been working with the Palestinians, as I said, since 1981. I'm a scientist. I'm a professor of medicine. My business is truth. You know, whoever tries to fool with numbers should be kicked out of science. You know, so we have published a number of scientific studies from Gaza on the attacks in 2009, 12, 14. We recently had a doctoral thesis on traumatic amputations from Gaza. And we are 100% dependent on the verification of the numbers, as you say. So it's a very interesting question. Mm-hmm. But the point is that even if you try to examine the numbers that the Palestinian Ministry of Health is putting forward, people who do that job, they are very clear in their conclusions. Their numbers, the Palestinian numbers, are actually below the UN numbers and the numbers from different international NGOs. So how do they count? I examined that because I was going to use these numbers in my research. So I told the Minister of Health, and he is Dr. Yosef Aborish now, and of course he is a member of the civilian part of Hamas. This is what international pragmatic politicians called the de facto government in Gaza, who, by the way, won the election in 2006, a democratic election, but that's forgotten now. So when you examine the way that they collect their numbers, they have an office with people staffed around the clock. They call all the hospitals in Gaza at certain times appointed, and they get the numbers. And the numbers are only accepted if they have the full name, the ID number, and the data of birth and state of birth and so on. If they're not sure about that, they don't enter them. So this is a quality-controlled way of conducting number acquisition. The problem, of course, after the 7th of October is that the Israeli occupation army systematically destroy all archives and all data collection systems. So the whole data collection system of the Ministry of Health in Gaza broke down. So what they do now is they do endpoint entry counting. So they only count the people who come to a hospital emergency room, dead or dying during the first 12 hours. And these numbers are the ones that are published. And I'm sure that you also are aware of the fact that this allegation that they're lying was put forward in November also. Then they published the whole list of the thousands and thousands of killed till then. So there are two problems. One is to verify death in a war situation, which is difficult. And the other problem is, of course, that their normal health data system has broken down. So they have to go by paper and pencil. I have not seen any reliable proof that the Palestinians are lying about the numbers, because it's not in their interest. Because what you should know also is that the Palestinian people is an extremely well-educated people. They are so thirsty for knowledge. They have the highest literacy rate in the world, and they have definitely the highest academic level in the Arab world. So my friends in Gaza, in the Al-Azhar University, in Islamic University, they are high-class academics. They would never, for political reasons, lie. What would be the benefit of lying? Number one, you would be...
Well, sympathies of the world,
No.
of course.
Yeah, but come on. 35,000, would 17,000 be less sympathy?
I don't know. Because
what you're saying is part of the attempt to tell the world that you can never trust anybody who oppose the powers.
Just so I'm going to outline my own position, because I had up until 2017-18, I was very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Then after that, I was sympathetic to the Israel cause. Then on 9th of October, I thought to myself, well, I'm being asked. There's peoples that have slaughtered 1,200 people with like incredible barbarity, and the other side is gonna bomb all of the civilians with very indiscriminate bombing. And now you choose sides, and I'm like, no, thank you. I'm not gonna choose between those sides, because I think both sides are behaving moronically. But the reason why I put forth these numbers is that this is a game of narrative. I'm not gonna, like, if it were only 10,000 people, I would not sit here and be like, well, that makes it okay. That's not what I'm gonna do, and I think it's morally wrong to do so. However, as you said, this is a game of narrative. And since we're in this situation, I mean, before 7th of October, yes, you can say that there was an occupation, you can say open-air prison. However, there were a lot of Palestinians that were working in Israel. There was the mastermind of this of the 7th of October plans was treated in an Israeli hospital. And there were no Israelis allowed in Gaza. Yes, they won the election in 2006, but what happened to the Fatah members? What happened to the PA members? What happened to the PLO? What happened to all of these factions that were actually political adversaries within the Gaza region? They were killed. So to say that this situation is exclusively due to some kind of an occupation of the Israelis, I think that's, I'm not going to say childish, but I think you're omitting too many variables, such as there are hostages still being kept in captivity in Gaza. So I mean, for instance, if I look to Iceland, if this was my family, I would not like to think about any casualties that are the victims of war. And I think because, I mean, in 2015, there were, and 2017 to 2017, there were a lot of terrorist attacks in Europe. And we went to Raqqa and Mosul, and we killed a lot of people. A lot of civilians were killed. And I don't think any European says to themselves, well, we should have not defeated ISIS because there were too many casualties of civilians. So I'm wondering, because we have incredible history of Jewish people not having any friends in the international community. So I find it interesting that, given the fact that Israel, well, we have this Zionism, but I think Zionism has been an answer to anti-Semitism throughout, some would say, millennia, some would say a few centuries, some would say in the past few decades. But regardless of that, we're asking an ethnic group of 15 million to allow a terrorist attack to happen and them just to lie down. How would you respond to this? A lot of stuff, but you go.
I feel like I'm getting into the interviewer's position now. No, I mean,
we can switch roles. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I listen to you, and I disagree on certain important points. Don't forget that after 2006, when there was a fair and open election in Palestine, by the way, the first democratic election in any Arab country, which was observed by all the European agencies, so blah, blah, and they all said, perfect, no signs of any wrongdoing during the election. And as we agree on, Hamas won a landslide victory. Did they form a government by themselves? No, they formed a unity government. That was recognized by my country, by the way, and by Russia and by some few other countries. It took only a few weeks until that unity was smashed by US and Israel, because the most dangerous thing to Israel is Palestinian unity. So they do everything they can to split and split and split. And that's a tactique well known from colonial powers. It is to divide and rule. So what we have seen, and I don't, let me be very clear on this. I don't support Hamas. I don't support Fatah. I don't support PA or Shihad or PFLP. I don't support any Palestinian fraction, political party or military group. I support the Palestinian people in their sovereign right to resist occupation with the means they see fit, also with arms, but of course within the limits of international law, Geneva Convention, Hague Convention, and so on. That's my position, and that's the position of the Norwegian Solidarity Movement. And it is up to the Palestinian people themselves to decide their future. Every attempt to formulate Palestinian unity is shot down. Netanyahu himself has said we need Hamas. Why did they allow Hamas to be the de facto government in Gaza? Because it is perfect to maintain the divide among the Palestinian political powers. Because once the Palestinians get together and have a formulated unity government and really align on some certain basic goals, they will be a very much stronger political force than they are today. So all this rhetoric about Hamas and Fatah and these are the good guys and these are the bad guys must be seen in a greater international concept where the powers, in particular NATO, US, and Israel, are trying at every corner to dismantle Palestinian unity and to discredit the right of the Palestinian people to resist occupation by naming everything they do terrorism. In my world, the terror state is Israel, because they fulfill every part of the formal definition of terrorism, using military power and armed powers to scare and terrorize a people. That's exactly what they've been doing for 48 years. They started with Begin and Stern and Irgun and these terrorist groups to just scare away the Palestinian people from the villages, from the cities. They fled, 750,000, many of them in the diaspora. Today it's 1.2 million people in Rafah with the exactly same technique applied, scaring, bombing, and frightening people to leave their homes, and then bombing their homes. So I disagree fundamentally to your narrative, because I think it's wrong, and I think it is the narrative of the occupiers. Just as we heard in school when we were going to understand the Belgian occupation of Congo.
So you can't blame me.
No, no, my brother, you're a product of your time, just as I am. But the problem with our Western minds in Europe, I mean, we're sitting here, we have water. Do they have water in Gaza? No. 97% is unfit for human consumption. We have coffee. Do they have coffee in Gaza? Not anymore. We have safety. I don't need to bring my passport. Do we hear any drones over Reykjavik? No, because it's peaceful. We have food in the fridge. We shower in drinking water. We have all the commodities that the occupied people can only dream of. So our understanding is like an academic, intellectual exchange. So I think this and I think that. But to understand the brutality of colonialism, we need to go back to how we colonized North America, how we killed the native Indians, how we slaughtered the bisons, their living, the foundation of their living. If you go back and study Belgian colonization in Congo, it's so dark, it's so brutal, it's so horrible. You don't even believe what you read. Now, what we see today in Gaza and in the West Bank is another colonial power, supported by the colonial powers, exercising their expansion. This has nothing to do with the defense of Israel. This is an attack, this is an expansional attack from a colonial power who has stated that their goal in Zionism is from the river to the sea. What are the two blue lines in the Israeli flag? It's from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean and the Zionist state in between. So when people are, oh, you can't shout from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Oh, who started that from the river to the sea? The Zionist project. So all of these other things, and I repeat again, I'm a medical doctor. I've chosen side with life. I would treat any wounded coming to me in Shifa or in Mustashfa al-Quds or anywhere else the same way. An Israeli soldier would get my full attention, my full compassion, and my professionalism, just as a Palestinian child. That's nothing to debate. In that, I'm completely neutral. But I have chosen side for the oppressed. So when I go to Gaza and not to Israel. And when you say you want to maintain a neutral position, I'd like to remind you of Desmond Tutu. You remember Desmond Tutu, Archbishop in South Africa, one of the pioneers and the giants of the anti-apartheid struggle. He says, if you remain neutral in a situation of oppression and abuse of power, you're on the side of the oppressors.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to. The reason why I remain neutral is because I'm not convinced on either point. And historically, the people who have sided on the other side of the Jews have not been on the right side of history. So what I'm wondering is that you are omitting certain aspects, such as the hostages, such as the barbarian.
No, I don't omit the hostages.
Let me just throw you one question. Like, for instance, 7th of October, was that resistance?
First, let me make a note on what you call the hostages. I agree, they should be released, all of them. But so should also the more than 2,000 illegally held Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons.
Yes.
And Umar Barghouti should be released, and all the Palestinian kids sitting in Israeli prisons. So don't only talk about the hostages in Gaza, talk about the hostages in Israel, number one. Number two, when we are going to define the attack or the breakout, and I have the number of Israeli killed here. I always refer to them. Bear in mind, there were actually 33 Israeli children killed. This is from the UN OCHA report from yesterday. No child should be killed in an armed conflict or in a war. No child. Be it Russian, Ukrainian, Norwegian, Icelandic, Palestinian, Israeli, Jewish, whatever. So I completely denounce that. And I say that any perpetrator from the Palestinian side who have been attacking civilians and committing war crimes should be investigated and sentenced, just like the Israeli generals and Netanyahu. Was it a terror attack? I think that remains to be seen because the narrative of what happened on the 7th of October is also very debated. When you say slaughter, bestial, and so on, we have seen that all of these claims of sexual abuse, of burning children, cutting heads, none of it has been proven to be.
Well, I can exclusively watch the content that was posted by the Hamas fighters, but for instance, the Nova Festival. And I think to myself, well, if you're asking
I denounce that. I denounce that completely. End of question.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. But I'm having because it's really hard to parse this apart, because you have these fighters that and the jubilant feature of their willingness to perpetrate these attacks gives you chills. And sometimes when I'm looking at the stuff that is being said by, for instance, Hamas, they tell you, well, 7th of October will happen again and again. And when you have that variable of Hamas or the Hamas leaders saying that they will perpetrate these kind of attacks again and again, you cannot avoid to think to yourself, well, what do you want the Israelis to do? Which is because no, Mads, honestly, because you said you were saying on us earlier, you have to be on the side of the oppressed. The oppressed have really all of history been the Jews. And there has always been this narrative to say that the Jews are not allowed in a certain area, allowed here, allowed there. And there are only 15 million. There are 2.2 Muslims that have of course it varies, but they have not much sympathies to any kind of Jews being, like, for instance, Hamas says that they had to get rid of every Jew on the planet. So I'm wondering why.
Stop. What did you just say?
Hamas leaders.
That they say they will get rid of every Jew on the planet?
Yeah.
Show me that documentation.
I've
No,
watched
actually,
videos.
you have. I mean, you're a serious journalist, man.
No.
How can you say that?
Is that wrong?
Yeah.
And not any Hamas leader has
Listen, I'm not saying
has ever said.
you're saying in plural the Hamas leaders are saying they want to get rid of every Jew on the planet. That's a blatant lie. You know,
I don't have any data before me like you do.
But you know the charter. It says 67 border. The Oslo Accord. Let's go back to realities.
Okay.
The Oslo Accord, which was signed by Israel and by the Palestinian leaders, at that time, the armed resistance, which at that time was Fatah and PLO, you know, they wanted to kill Yasser Arafat and Abu Shihad. That's why they invaded Lebanon in 82. They went straight up to Fakhani in Beirut to kill the head of the snake, as they said, which was the armed resistance. In 82, the then Hamas was PLO and Fatah. Then you had the negotiations and the Oslo Treaty. What was the preconditions for the Oslo Treaty? That Israel should retract to the 67 border, dismantle all the settlements, and have the settlers go back to Israel. Have they done that? No, they have done the exact opposite, continuously establishing new settlements, new occupation, and dismantle the whole structure of the Oslo Treaty. So in the charter of Hamas, which I don't have to defend because I don't support Hamas, but they say that they will accept the 67 border. That's totally clear. So if Israel had complied with what everybody is hailing now, the 32 years old Oslo Treaty, which has been a stab in the back for the Palestinian people, we wouldn't have had this situation.
No, but I mean, I've seen imams, now come to think of it, I've seen imams say that the Jews ought to be eradicated.
You said Hamas leadership.
Okay, but there were definitely leaders that have said that 7th of October needed to happen again and again, and it would.
But listen, do you know the Great March of Return?
Yes.
So the Palestinians, they have tried, in Gaza they have tried everything. I've been traveling to Gaza 2-3 times a year for the last 18, 20 years. I don't only go there when there is attacks and bombing, which I do. I go there in between. I teach medical students, I do research, I follow up patients. Recently, for the last 3 years, I've been working on cancer care in Gaza. You know what? The Palestinians in Gaza, 2.2 million, they don't have access to radiation therapy. Why? Because the occupiers don't think they should have that treatment modality.
That was before the attacks.
Yeah. That was before. So I was in Gaza last year in February and in June, and I should go back in November because we were going to start this radiation therapy project. So the consequence of that is, of course, that the mortality for Palestinian women with breast cancer is significantly higher than for women in Iceland and Norway because they don't have access to modern treatment. What is that? Medical apartheid. Why is that happening in 2024? Because the Palestinian people are second class or third class for the occupiers. So the Great March of Return was an attempt started by a student in Gaza to say, okay, we'll do as the West asks us. We will do non-violent, peaceful demonstrations going to the fence. It's not a border, it's a fence around Gaza every Friday and say, open up this ghetto. I don't use the term prison because I don't think the people in Gaza are guilty of a sentence which put people in prison. I think it's a ghetto, like the Warsaw ghetto. So they went to the fence again and again. I was there. I took part in the treatment. And what did Israelis do? And what did US and NATO do? They never
shot at them?
Yeah, they shot at them. They had 100 snipers lying on these sand towers or these sand mountains that they built, and they shot them. Where did they shoot them? In the head or in the heart? No.
Legs,
joints, elbow, knees, ankles. I have pictures I have taken of young Palestinian men who have done nothing wrong but to go to the fence with a Palestinian flag, maybe a slingshot, and say, let us out. Can you imagine being incarcerated for 16 years? Without the right to travel, to go out, without the right to education, without the right to proper food and work. The unemployment rate after 16 years of siege in Gaza is between 40 and 60%, according to the age group. In young people, and most of the people in Gaza are very young, the average age in Gaza is 17.6 years. It's a child ghetto. And they are denied every fundamental human right that we that we are enjoying in our. We would never accept any limitations of our human rights. So they go to the fence again and again and again for 1.5 years. The Israelis shoot them systematically to invalidate them, to shoot off their arms and legs, so to tell them, if you resist us, this is what's going to happen to you, very systematically. So they end up, after the Great March of Return, they have to stop that because it's getting them nowhere. And then you have this breakout. You can like it or you can dislike it. But an oppressed people, like Nelson Mandela said, they will never yield. And you can look at the Kurds, you can look at the Tamils, you can look at any oppressed and conquered or occupied people. They will continue to resist.
But you're omitting another variable here, which is this. I'm gonna keep the jail analogy, although you don't like it. But there are two wardens to this jail, which is also Egypt. What is Egypt's part
again
in this situation?
A very interesting question, and again, I'm not
because I'm wondering who is the occupier. If the occupier is Israel, well, you would say, well, this is on Palestinian land. Okay, fair enough. But given the situation, the Egyptians have an increased responsibility, I would say, to help, because this was Egyptian land many decades ago. So how do you perceive that situation?
Well, I think all the Arab leaders are complicit of betraying the Palestinian people for many reasons, because don't forget that this region is incredibly important because of the natural resources and the strategic position. It's the crossroad between Asia, Europe, Arabia, and Africa. So for the geostrategical analysis, the whole Middle East, and not at least Palestine and Israel, are incredibly important points of control for oil and gas and for the free flow.
Yeah,
look
shipments,
what Houthis have been doing just by closing or limiting the access from their shores to the commercial travels that have to go around the Cape South in Africa. So this is a very hot spot, and the Arab leaders are careful to maintain their control, and they are not democratic. Why is it so easy for the West to cooperate with Saudi Arabia? It's really an Islamic state with quite horrible record of applying Sharia and all that. But as long as it comes to geopolitical control and like oil and gas and dollars and business and profit, we close the eye. But when it comes to the Palestinians, they're all terrorists, they're all so horrible, they're all Muslim, horrible people. And that's this double standard again. And when it comes to the Ukrainian people, it's all okay to give them weapons and allow them all the support we have. So the role of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar and all the others is, of course, that they also join in the game, the geopolitical, strategical game. And the important thing about Egypt was, of course, that it was the first Arab country to sign a peace deal with Israel, which was a major breakthrough for Israel, because their ambition, not at least with the Abraham Accord and the games played by the Trump government, was to try to break the alliance, or at least the verbal alliance between the Arab states and the people of Palestine, and to make formal alliances with Israel, to have more access to the region and more political stability. Because the mother of all conflicts today, in a way, is the occupation of Palestine. And that has nothing to do with the question of the Jews. And I think you are you're mixing up two different issues. I agree with you totally that the Jewish people have the right to safety, security, and to live in peace, just like every other people. And by the way, there are not only the Holocaust that have been massacres up through the genocidal massacres. I mean, there are many people who have been exposed to that, as you mentioned earlier. But why was it the Palestinian people who should give away half of their land? Because they had never been anti-Semitic. In fact, the Palestinian people were known to shield and hide and protect their Jewish neighbors in times of conflict. I am not an anti-Semite. I'm a strong condemner of any anti-Semitic attack on the Jewish people. I've written 2 books on Gaza, Ice in Gaza, Night in Gaza. In Night in Gaza, the foreword is written by my good Jewish friend, Noam Chomsky. And the first chapter is written by my good Jewish friend, Max Blumenthal. And the postscript is by a Palestinian journalist. I'm all for Jewish-Palestinian unity, respect and mutual solutions. And what is promising now is, of course, that there is a growing body of American Jews who says no to occupation, no to genocide, no to the bombing of Gaza. And in particular, young Jews who join on campus with their Palestinian and Arab brothers and sisters in the encampment that we see, this global student intifada, which is a new power, just like we saw during the Vietnam War. When the students got active and the young people got active, you had Kent State, where they shot and killed students for being in solidarity with the Vietnamese people. I think the same is happening now. So I think this trying to paint a picture of this being an anti-Semite attack from the Palestinian people against the Jewish people is completely wrong. And it is serving the interest of the occupiers and the US geopolitical powers. So to answer about Egypt, of course, Egypt has a major role to play. They should have been much more open and much more proactive in keeping Rafah open.
They have fortified even more their borders now.
Well, that's
Palestine.
because everyone who knows Gaza and who knows what's going on now saw that the Israeli plan was to use their shovel dozers, their military shovel dozers, and the bombing and the forced displacement to push 1.1 or 2.2 million people into the desert of Sinai. The Egyptians would not allow that to happen. So the physical barrier is a symbol of how brutal this chasing around of 2.2 million people within a cage is, because that's another thing you omitted in your reasoning. Because had Gaza been open, the Palestinian people, the civilians, could flee, and you could have a man-to-man battle. It's not the Palestinian resistance hiding among the civilians. It's the civilians not being allowed to fly, as you see in every armed conflict. First 2-3 days you see bombing, blah, blah, and then you see the caravan of bicycles and cars and pickups with grandmother and some utensils and some mattresses trying to get in safety in the jungle, in the neighbor state, in another province. Not in Gaza, because they are incarcerated by the same people who occupy them and bomb them, starve them, deny them water, medicine, and decent human treatment.
But the Palestinian leaders also do that with the tunnels, which civilians are not allowed in, which could house a lot of people. But I mean, Mads, because I mean,
how did the Vietnamese win the war against the U.S. occupation? Two things: People's War, broad-based people's resistance, and tunnels.
Yeah.
Tunnels is, I mean, the Warsaw Ghetto.
Tunnels have been used, but the extent of the tunnels in Palestine is incredible. Which is also because
what do you want them to do? To stand on the surface of the earth and say, "We are here, come and kill us"? I'm
very reluctant to say that one should do one or the other thing.
Okay, thank you. Me too.
But because that's why, and this is what bothers me a little bit with the side, but with both sides. I think they're both guilty of this, which is that the amount of certainty. There's a great book, I'm gonna plug it here, is Magnús Þorkell Bernhardsson. He's an Icelandic academic who teaches in Williams School, I think. It's over in the States. It's a great book, which he names this conflict the perfect conflict, because finding a solution is so hard. And what I find both sides of this conflict guilty of, both in the Western media and the Al Jazeera and other medias, I think they're guilty of finding the solutions to be so obvious that if they would only be put forth, everything would be resolved.
Okay, so what's
let me finish the point. If the Israelis would put down their arms, would there be peace in this region?
I don't know, but
we know.
No. Listen. If the Oslo Treaty had been followed up, that Israel retracts to the 1967 border, they leave any siege of Gaza. There will be a physical connection between Gaza and the West Bank. All the settlements are dismantled and the settlers are going back to Israel.
Over in the West Bank.
Yeah, from the West Bank.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the Oslo Treaty, and the reason why the Palestinians signed the Oslo Treaty was that was a compromise they would accept. And what did PLO do then? They laid down their weapons. So the answer to your question is that given an end to the root cause, not only the occupation of Palestine, but the expansion, which we see every day. I mean, Netanyahu and his fascist government members, they are bragging about expanding with new colonies. I don't call them settlements because they are de facto, from a legal point of view, they are colonies. And one thing which is strictly illegal for an occupier is to settle your people in occupied territory. So would there be peace? I think so. I think that the Palestinians, and they have said it, if you see what is on the table now from the de facto government in Gaza, Hamas, it is actually a settlement with a hudna. Hudna is a construction in Islam. It's a long-term peace agreement between two adversaries who do not solve the basic problem, but they declare peace for, say, 20 years. And in that meantime, you will have to work with political solutions. That's been offered again and again, rejected by Israel.
Yeah, but now we're getting
So,
into
no, I'm just going to finish. Because the question you ask, would there be peace if the occupation ended? You could say exactly the same. You could put the same question forward with Ukraine. And what would Zelensky say? Zelensky would say that if Russia leaves the occupied territory, moves back to the borders before the occupation, we will discuss peace and have a peace treaty with Russia. Because the core problem for an occupied people is the occupation of their land and the chasing away of their people or killing of their people. So I think the answer for any reasonable human being in Palestine would be that leave us alone and we will leave you alone. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that, of course, resistance against colonialism, it's not the Tea Party, man. It's not. I mean, we killed civilians in Norway. We killed Norwegian civilians to obtain our goals. So it's a little bit of a. I'm not saying that you're naive, but it's
okay.
No, you're not. But it's an oversimplification to equal to the two sides. I have a slide in my presentation saying this is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult occupation.
But isn't that naive? I'm not. Isn't it naive to say that the conflict that has been tried to resolve for many decades is simple? Isn't that very grandiose of you?
No, I didn't say simple. I said difficult.
Oh, okay,
listen to what I said, man. Come on, wake up.
My bad. But
I said this is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult occupation.
But
and it is a difficult occupation.
But we have to remember the Hamas origins, which was that they were angry with other Palestinians that they would allow any kind of Israel state to.
Where did Hamas come from? Muslim Brotherhood, Egypt.
Yeah.
And who fertilized the development of the Hamas movement? Israel and the United States. Why? Because it was the perfect construct to have division in the Palestinian camp.
Oh, I cannot verify that.
But
regardless of that, they have jihadist sympathies, which is also what the reason why they're called terrorists is that they have jihadist sympathies, and there is these Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam. I think that variable is also something because, I mean, this has been, as you mentioned earlier, there have been protests here. This has even had an impact on the situation in Britain, where the local elections were very much impacted by the current situation in Palestine. Mm. So, I mean, this is impacting all over the world. We have Germans now screaming and dancing to music saying foreigners out. I think all of these events are contingent. And I think they're contingent upon a pathway that is very worrisome. So the reason why I find it fascinating to discuss this, especially with someone who has very much history of helping the Palestinians, is that I think we need to come towards some kind of a reasonable solution to this, because this is not only impacting the Middle East, this is also impacting the whole world. And the reason why I want to ask you which kind of solution you would think that would be realistic and viable is that we're in a shit show.
We're in a
today.
shit show. Yeah.
This is a shit show. And I mean, this is probably, there's only a matter of time until it will impact the politics of Iceland and Norway. So how do you see the current situation worldwide? Because you mentioned the protest. I've said that the protest have that nothing has hurt the cause of Palestinians like the protest in U.S. schools. Because although yes, Israel has lost a lot of support in the U.S., the Palestinian cause has also lost a lot, and many more people have come to this neutrality position where I am, which I think is the only viable option, although that can be, as you've argued, contested. But given Western politics, how do you see the pathway forward? Like because I'm loving this conversation because we're having quite more congenial conversation that I would have hoped for. But given that this is impacting politics all over the world, how do you perceive the situation going forward with regards to that variable?
2 points. I think you're summing up in a very good way, and I think there are two levels to answer that question. Number one, I think one of the most worrisome aspects of what's happening now is the loss of adherence to international rules and international decency. I mean, to disallow whatever you think about the Palestinian people in Gaza and their current leadership, the civilian part and the armed part, whatever you think about that, you do simply not starve 2.2 million civilians to death, to disease, and to harmful ends. You don't do that. You don't disallow 180 women delivering every day the right to have a hospital to deliver in. You do not kill people, 100, 200 per 24 hours systematically, who are unarmed and unprotected. So the breakdown of international order that Israel has been allowed to go on with this for, what is it now? It's the 230 days and nights, with no impact of the resolutions in the Security Council, the ICJ ruling, both from the start and from yesterday, the ICC rulings which are saying basically, please adhere to international law. You cannot use starvation as a weapon of occupation. So I think that is a very worrisome thing, because and with the support of the US and the US weaponry and the political support of US with this siege, and even more worrisome, I mean, if you look at the hundreds, if not thousands of trucks standing at Rafah and into the desert of Sinai, not allowed into Gaza by Israel, which contains rice and medicine, antibiotics, pain relief, anesthetics, And
even Israel settlers
attack them and burn them. I mean, how did we get there? That the policing, the UN policing of the world order has fallen completely apart, and that is, in my view, an attack to every one of us. So number one, we need to redefine the basis of humanitarian law and humanitarian decency and predictability. I mean, we will have armed conflicts. We will have armed conflicts again. But if Russia had killed 150 white journalists in Ukraine from BBC, CNN and Fox News, what would have happened? If the Russian occupation forces had killed 500 doctors, nurses and paramedics and ambulance people in Ukraine, what would the world have said? So the second problem here, which we need to solve, is the deep racist attitude to the people of the global south. It is the colonial attitude of these people being less worthy of decent treatment than us. How can you otherwise explain that 5,400 Israelis were reported injured, and now they have injured 80,000 Palestinian people in Gaza? The ratio between these two numbers are the same ratios as I can present to you when it comes to life expectancy, to mortality in delivering women between Israel and Palestine, which are graphic. Disparate, they're so different that you have a hard time believing it. And this is the core of the most challenging problem, namely that human lives are depending on the skin color, your race, and if you belong to the white or non-white part of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a common base for all humanity. And if we are going to proceed on that level, then we need to discuss how we can decolonize our thinking. Because we tend to, as we have had in this discussion, we tend to say that, you know, the Palestinian life is just as important and worthy as a white life. It's not. And that's the deepest problem we are facing today. That is the resurgence of colonialism.
Mm-hmm. I agree to a certain extent. I don't agree because I read Edward Said and all of these colonialist and anti-colonialist literature, and I don't think that all of the problems that the development world is facing can be just pointed at imperialism and colonialism. However, I did concede the point. I had a Kurdish girl who was a member of parliament here in Iceland. I did concede the point that I think there's definitely evidence that we in the West find it easier to see a brown kid die than a white kid die. I think that's just a bug that is absolutely within our core. I think it is easier for us to see certain areas bombed, knowing that there are people that don't have the same skin pigmentation as we do. I think it is a bug that needs to be eradicated, and this is actually why I was so angry with the Israel cause. It's because on Twitter, Netanyahu posted a video of him indiscriminately bombing a large building, and this was him posting it, showing pride in how he was enforcing the horrific scenes that we're seeing coming out of Gaza after the 7th of October attacks, which I thought to myself, well, yes, the 7th of October attacks were horrible, but that does not justify indiscriminately bombing a whole facility. However, because I think we'll come to a point of an agreement here, because I was listening to John Mearsheimer speaking about this. He talks about open prisons, and he said the words genocide didn't. He was on record saying that this was not a genocide, and certain aspects needed to be fulfilled in order for it to be genocide. However, he said that it was a worrisome development that a genocide might become not only a viable option, but an attractive option for Israel in order for them to, because they were not going to defeat Hamas. John Mearsheimer said, well, they're not going to defeat Hamas. It's just not realistic. And if they can't defeat Hamas, they will need to go to some other lengths, and that's by starvation. And what has annoyed me a little bit is that we don't take into account the variable of, although maybe, well, you cannot call it a genocide, but we don't look at any point where it might become a genocide. And this is something that the Rwandan genocide was very much, the U.S. was justifiably guilty of, and they were criticized after being scrutinized for not going in before it became a genocide. And I worry that might happen in Gaza. And I think that this variable is not getting enough attention. That although, well, okay, I'll concede to you that this has not become a genocide, but could it become a genocide? Okay. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that point, which I think is a point of agreement with us, because I'm very worried, and this is my worst worry, because I mean, 70% of all the housing has been bombed, and Israel has not been asked to lay out a plan of the day after.
No, absolutely, and you know, I'm less interested in the academic and legal discussion of the definition of genocide. To me, what's going on in Gaza now is so horrible that it defies any definition. of bombing, starving, thirsting out, and letting people die from curable diseases in mass numbers, that this just have to end. And then we can take the historical discussion. As you said, you know, it took many years to find out how many killed there and there. But the facts that we have, the facts on the ground today are so horrible that it must end. And all the nations, all the independent nations, Norway, Iceland, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Faroe Islands, could be a massive political force for defense of humanity, for defending the rights of a Palestinian woman, a child, a man, an elder, a diabetic patient, a cancer patient, to have decent treatment as humans. This is an attack on all of us, because if the US and Israel are getting away with these abhorrent attacks on civilians, and then I leave aside the political background, I say we don't want a world where starvation, thirsting, and destruction of the holy healthcare, which is healthcare. The hospitals are the palaces of compassion, care, and solidarity with less fortunate people. To have that destroyed at the level that Israelis are destroying healthcare in Gaza and now also in the West Bank, we cannot have that world. So I appeal to anybody, right or left, to say, go on fighting, find a political solution, but stop killing children, pregnant women, lactating women, sick people, and indefensible civilians. That has to stop, and for that end to come, we need more solidarity, more viable and very pregnant actions to force our governments, the Icelandic government, the Norwegian government, to move forward in defending our common human base as human beings. We don't want a world like the one we see in Gaza now, regardless of political stance. And that's my position as a medical doctor, and then we can discuss a lot of politics, but this has to end now. We can't wait. We can't wait for ICJ. And ICJ is becoming more and more impatient, as you see. They're issuing more and more orders because everyone who wants to see can see that we are now filming a new Holocaust, slow motion, speed up, 1.5, 2.5, you know. But it's all there. It's all there. It's in the documentation, and you can discuss as much as you want whether these numbers are 10% higher or lower than they should be. But do you really doubt that what's going on in Gaza now is beyond what we want to allow to happen in this world today? Do you doubt that?
No.
No, exactly.
No.
Exactly, brother. Then we agree.
Just like I laid out.
Yeah. So let's stop that and then take the political discussions. And as you said, to get rid of Hamas, I mean, Hamas is not the problem. The problem for Israel and the US is the willingness of the Palestinian people to say, we will not surrender. The old man, the young woman, the medical student, they will not surrender, just as we wouldn't surrender in 40-45. We're going to have our country. It's as simple as that. And then there are lots of political, discussions and academic details and all that. But an occupied people have the right to resist. So has the Palestinian, within the limits of international law. And an occupied people will never cease to resist a brutal occupation. And the occupation of Palestine is the root cause. It's brutal, it's inhuman, and it's never been as bad as in 2023, 2024. I thought we had come longer. But the breakdown of international order and rules and application of international law, Geneva Convention, Hague Convention, the Declaration of Human Rights, of women's rights, of children's rights, it is a complete collapse of moral power in the West. It's a complete collapse of moral leadership in Europe and in the United States. And what has been done through the last 20 years to build confidence between the global South and the Western powers has completely collapsed. Believe me, I've been in Africa and Arabia for 2 months until Christmas. The distrust, the lack of trust and respect for EU and for the United States and Canada and Australia has never been so low as it is now. And that's a common problem for all of us.
On that dire, slightly hopeful note, we end our discussion. Give peace a chance. Mads Gilbert, thank you so much for joining me. Until next time.
Shukran jazilan, and I say, as we say in Gaza, Kuluna Gaza, which means in Arabic, we are all Gaza, because Gaza is all of us, and we have to make a stance. Shukran.
Thank you for coming.
Tackar.